Welcome to Clandestine Cases, Chapter 1. It was on a dreary evening in the autumn of 1894 that I found myself once again seated opposite Sherlock Holmes in our familiar quarters at 221B Baker Street. A thick fog curled against the window panes, and the flickering gaslight cast long shadows upon the room. Holmes, ever absorbed in his peculiar habits, lay stretched upon the settee, his lean frame shrouded in a dressing gown, a half-smoked pipe resting between his fingers. "Watson," he murmured suddenly, without lifting his gaze from the ceiling. "How many footsteps did the visitor outside take before stopping at our door?" I started, glancing toward the entrance. A faint shuffling had indeed reached my ears only moments before. 5 or 6, I should think, I replied hesitantly. 7, Holmes corrected, sitting up. And they were hesitant. Notice the uneven spacing. This is no ordinary caller, rather, someone whose mind is burdened by indecision or fear. Even as he spoke, the measured rap of the knocker echoed through the apartment. Mrs. Hudson's voice soon followed, announcing a guest. "Mr. Albert Linwood, sir." The name meant nothing to me, but Holmes was already on his feet, his keen eyes alight with interest. "Show him in, if you please." A moment later, a man of about 50 entered. He was of middling height, dressed in an impeccable frock coat that bespoke affluence, yet his face was pale, and his gloved hands trembled slightly as he removed his hat. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice quavering, "I'm in desperate need of your counsel. A terrible event has taken place, one which defies all reason." Holmes gestured toward the chair by the fireplace. "You have my attention, Mr. Linwood. Pray, compose yourself and tell us everything." Linwood exhaled deeply before speaking. "It is about my brother, Ernest Linwood. He is dead." Watson and I exchanged glances. Holmes steepled his fingers, his gaze never wavering. "The manner of his death?" he asked. Linwood swallowed. "That is precisely the mystery. He was found inside a locked room, with no sign of forced entry, and by his side lay an object that could not have been there." Holmes leaned forward. "And what object was that?" Linwood hesitated, his eyes darting toward the door as if fearing unseen listeners. Then, in a hushed tone, he spoke. "An iron casket, Mr. Holmes. A casket that vanished from our family estate 40 years ago." A silence fell over the room, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock. Holmes's fingers drummed lightly upon his knee, and I recognized the gleam in his eye. An unmistakable sign that his mind had already begun its relentless pursuit of the truth. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Tell me, Mr. Linwood, what exactly was inside this iron casket?" Chapter 2. Albert Linwood's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment he seemed uncertain whether to proceed. His fingers clutched the brim of his hat as he stared into the flickering fire. Then, after a deep breath, he answered. "That," he said gravely, "is the greatest mystery of all, Mr. Holmes. When the casket was first discovered beside my brother's body, it was locked. We did not attempt to open it at once, given the shock of Ernest's death, you understand. But within a matter of hours, when the constable returned to examine it, the casket had vanished." Holmes leaned forward in his chair, his sharp gaze unwavering. "Vanished." Linwood gave a solemn nod. "No trace of it. The room was locked from the inside, the windows latched. The only key was found in my brother's pocket. And yet, somehow, between the moment the doctor pronounced him dead and the age-8 constable's return, the casket was no longer there. A shadow of interest passed over Holmes's face. He reached for his pipe and tapped it twice against the arm of his chair before speaking again. "Describe this casket to me, if you please." Linwood hesitated. "I only saw it once, long ago, as a child. It was said to be made of blackened iron, heavy with ornate engravings along its sides. No one in my family knew how to open it. The key had been lost for as long as I can remember. My grandfather, Lord Edwin Linwood, was particularly secretive about it, though he always insisted it held nothing of value, and yet it vanished from our estate after his death in 1854 without explanation. We assumed it stolen." Holmes's eyes flickered toward me, and I could see his mind whirring like the finely tuned mechanism of a pocket watch. "Tell me, Mr. Linwood, where was your brother's body found?" "In his study on the second floor of our London townhouse," Linwood replied. "The door was locked from within. We had to break it open." "And the condition of the body?" Linwood swallowed hard. "There was no sign of struggle, no wounds, no indications of poison or violence. He was simply dead." Holmes exhaled, the faintest trace of a smile curving his lips. A locked-room mystery, a missing iron casket, and a death without apparent cause. "You do not disappoint, Mr. Linwood," I shuddered. "You speak it as though it were a mere intellectual exercise, Holmes. But a man has died under most unnatural circumstances." Holmes turned his gaze upon me, the intensity of his expression reminding me that to him every case was precisely that. "Chadupa, exercise in logic, a puzzle to be unraveled. Quite so, Watson," he said. "And that is why I must see the scene for myself. Mr. Linwood, we shall accompany you to your home at once." Linwood hesitated. I had not expected such immediate action. Holmes's smile did not waver. "Time is a most valuable commodity in our profession. Shall we?" Linwood nodded, rising to his feet. As he did, I could not help but notice the way his hands trembled, betraying an unease far beyond mere grief. We donned our coats, and within moments we were descending the steps of Baker Street into the swirling mist of a London night. The mystery of the iron casket had begun. Chapter 3. The cab ride through the mist-laden streets of London was a silent one, save for the rhythmic clatter of hooves against cobblestones. Albert Linwood sat across from us, his face pale in the dim glow of the carriage lantern. His fingers twitched restlessly in his lap, and more than once he cast uneasy glances towards the curtained window, as if expecting some unseen pursuer in the fog. Holmes observed him with his usual detachment, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You are anxious, Mr. Linwood," he remarked. Linwood exhaled sharply. "Can you blame me? My brother is dead, Mr. Holmes, under circumstances that defy logic. And this casket, this infernal thing, has reappeared only to vanish once more. It is as though the past is reaching out to strangle my family." Tipper regarded him with piercing curiosity. "Tell me, sir, who was the first to enter your brother's study after his death was discovered?" Linwood hesitated. "His valet, James Barlow. He had knocked several times that morning but received no reply. Finally, in desperation, he summoned the housekeeper, Mrs. Harrow, and together they forced the door open. And you arrived when? Minutes later. I had been taking breakfast downstairs when I heard the commotion. Holmes nodded. And was the iron casket there at that time? Linwood's brow furrowed. Yes, unmistakably. It sat beside my brother's chair, as though it had been placed there deliberately. Holmes glanced at me. You see, Watson, we already have something of interest. An object thought lost for 40 years suddenly reappears at the scene of an inexplicable death, only to vanish again under impossible circumstances. A puzzle worthy of our efforts. Carriage jolted to a stop outside a grand townhouse. Gas lamps flickered along the wrought iron railings, casting long shadows upon the damp pavement. As we stepped out, I noted the imposing facade of Linwood House, a place that, even in the heart of London, seemed cloaked in secrecy. Linwood led us inside. The entry hall was high-ceilinged and richly adorned, but there was a strange stillness in the air, as though the house itself held its breath. A dour-looking butler took our coats in silence, his eyes darting nervously between us. The study is this way, Linwood said, leading us down a long corridor. Holmes, ever alert, allowed his fingers to brush against the wallpaper, his eyes darting toward the oil lamps flickering in their sconces. Tell me, Mr. Linwood, who knew of the casket's significance? Linwood hesitated. Very few. My father never spoke of it after it disappeared. My brother, Ernest, was but a boy when it was last seen. I doubt he even remembered it. Holmes hummed softly, but said nothing. At last, we reached a heavy oak door. Linwood paused before it, his face pale. This is where my brother was found. With a deep breath, he turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open. The study was a stately room lined with mahogany bookshelves. A large desk stood before the window, and beside it, the very spot where Ernest Linwood had been found, lay an overturned chair. The scent of cigar smoke lingered in the air, mingling with the faint mustiness of old parchment. Holmes stepped inside, his gaze flitting across the space like that of a bird of prey. He crossed to the window and unlatched it with a flick of his fingers. Still secured, he murmured. His eyes then drifted to the fireplace, where a pile of half-burnt paper rested among the ashes. Bending down, he extracted a fragment and held it up to the light. The edges were blackened, but faint ink markings remained visible. Curious, he said. Someone attempted to destroy something of importance. Linwood paled. Do you think? But Holmes had already turned his attention elsewhere. He strode to the desk and ran his fingers over its polished surface. Then, with a sharp intake of breath, he stopped. He pointed to a faint mark upon the wood. Watson, what do you make of this? I leaned closer. There, barely visible in the lamplight, was a set of thin, parallel scratches, as though something heavy had been dragged across the desk. The casket, Holmes murmured. It was moved. A chill ran through me as I looked around the dimly lit room. The casket had vanished without a trace, and yet its presence lingered, a ghostly whisper in the air. Holmes turned to Linwood. Tell me, Mr. Linwood, where can I find James Barlow, the valet? Linwood hesitated. He left the house this morning, without a word. Holmes smiled thinly. Now, that is very interesting. Chapter 4. Holmes's words hung in the air, their weight pressing upon us like the fog rolling through the London streets outside. Linwood's expression wavered between concern and disbelief. Barlow left without a word. Holmes repeated, his fingers tapping idly against the edge of the desk. Surely, you do not mean to suggest he simply walked out? Linwood hesitated. This morning, I asked Mrs. Harrow, our housekeeper, to fetch him. She returned minutes later to say that his quarters were empty. His belongings were gone. Holmes exchanged a glance with me, and no one saw him leave. Linwood shook his head. The servants' entrance leads to a narrow passage at the back of the house. He could have slipped away unnoticed. Holmes turned abruptly and strode across the study, pausing near the fireplace. A most unusual departure, Watson, he mused, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. A manservant, long employed in a household, suddenly disappears the morning after his master's unexplained death, and on the very day a vanished casket is reported missing once more. I frowned. You suspect Barlow, then? Holmes smiled faintly. I suspect, my dear Watson, that Mr. Barlow knows more than he ought. He turned back to Linwood. What do you know of him? Linwood exhaled sharply. Barlow has been in our service for over 20 years. My brother trusted him implicitly. Yet trust is a most delicate thing, Holmes murmured. Did your brother confide in him? Linwood hesitated. I cannot say for certain, but Ernest was always rather private. Holmes nodded, his eyes scanning the room once more. And yet, someone did know of the iron casket. He gestured toward the faint scratches upon the desk. It was moved, perhaps opened. The question remains by whom. At that moment, a brisk knock at the door startled us. Linwood turned, his voice tight. Yes. The door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper, a woman of stout build and sharp eyes, her grey hair pinned beneath a crisp white cap. Begging your pardon, sir, she said, addressing Linwood. But there's a gentleman at the door, a police inspector. Linwood's brow furrowed. Inspector, I did not send for the police. Mrs. Harrow shifted uncomfortably. He asked for Mr. Holmes, sir. Holmes's eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. Then let us not keep the good inspector waiting. We followed Mrs. Harrow back through the dimly lit corridors until we reached the entrance hall. There, standing just inside the door, was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark overcoat. He removed his bowler hat, revealing a square-jawed face, lined with deep creases. Inspector Colin Bainbridge, Scotland Yard, he announced in a clipped tone. His sharp blue eyes settled upon Holmes. I had a feeling I'd find you here. Holmes regarded him with interest. And what brings you to Linwood House, Inspector? Bainbridge stepped forward, lowering his voice. I assume you're here about the strange business concerning Mr. Ernest Linwood's death. Holmes smiled thinly. A curious case indeed. Inspector, have you come to shed light on it? Bainbridge's expression darkened. No, Mr. Holmes. I've come to inform you that James Barlow, the missing valet, has just been found. Linwood inhaled sharply. Where? Bainbridge's gaze hardened. In the Thames, dead. A stunned silence filled the hall. My pulse quickened as I turned to Holmes, whose expression remained inscrutable. Drowned? Holmes asked quietly. Bainbridge nodded. Washed up near Wapping Docks. But here's the peculiar thing, Mr. Holmes. He was holding something when they pulled him from the water. Holmes raised an eyebrow. And what, pray, was that? Bainbridge exhaled. A key. For the first time that evening, I saw Holmes's expression shift. His sharp mind already piecing together the puzzle. A key, he murmured. Tell me, Inspector, was it an iron key? Bainbridge's brow furrowed. How the devil did you know that? Holmes only smiled, his gaze flickering with intrigue. Because, my dear Inspector, I suspect that James Barlow was killed for it. Chapter 5. Inspector Bainbridge's revelation hung in the air, like the thick London fog pressing against the windows of Linwood House. Albert Linwood's face had turned ashen, and he gripped the back of a nearby chair for support. Dead, he murmured. But how? Barlow was no enemy to anyone. Holmes turned his keen gaze toward Bainbridge. You said he was holding a key when he was found. Bainbridge nodded, clutched in his right hand, as though he refused to let go of it even in death. An iron key, old and rusted, yet oddly ornate. My men are having it examined, but I suspect it belonged to something valuable. He narrowed his eyes. Perhaps a certain casket. Holmes smiled faintly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. A reasonable assumption, Inspector. Linwood exhaled shakily. But that makes no sense. If Barlow took the key, how did he meet his end? Holmes tilted his head slightly, studying Linwood. That, my dear sir, is precisely the question we must answer. He turned back to Bainbridge. Where exactly was he found? Wapping Docks, early this morning. Some dock workers spotted him floating near the pilings. Judging by the state of the body, I'd say he was in the water for several hours, likely drowned in the dead of night. I shuddered at the thought, and no sign of the casket. None. Holmes exhaled softly, his gaze drifting momentarily to the flickering gaslight above us. Curious, he murmured. Very curious indeed. Bainbridge studied him with an expectant look. You have a theory, Mr. Holmes. Holmes smiled thinly. Theories are dangerous things, Inspector, when not yet tempered by facts. And we are still lacking in facts. He turned abruptly toward Linwood. Tell me, Mr. Linwood, did your brother keep us safe? Linwood blinked at the unexpected question. Why? Yes, in his study, concealed behind the bookshelf. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Show me. With visible reluctance, Linwood led us back into the dimly lit study. Holmes moved with swift precision, running his fingers along the edges of a tall bookcase before giving it a firm push. A soft click echoed through the room, and the shelf slid aside, revealing a small iron safe embedded into the wall. Holmes crouched before it. Was this opened after your brother's death? Linwood hesitated. I don't know. I hadn't thought to check. Holmes examined the lock, his fingers gliding over the dial. There are scratches here, fresh ones. Someone attempted to force it. Bainbridge stepped forward, and likely failed. Holmes's smile was almost imperceptible. That depends, Inspector. He turned back to Linwood. Would your brother have kept the combination written anywhere? Linwood shook his head. No, Ernest had an exceptional memory. He never wrote down such things. Holmes exhaled sharply. Then there is only one way forward. He stood and turned to Bainbridge. Inspector, if I am not mistaken, you have that iron key in your possession. Bainbridge hesitated. You think it belongs to this safe? Holmes's lips twitched at the corners. I think, Inspector, that the key Barlow died for may unlock the very secret Ernest Linwood was killed to keep. Bainbridge reached into his coat pocket and produced a small cloth bundle. Unwrapping it, he revealed the iron key. A heavy, old-fashioned thing with intricate engravings along the bow. Holmes took it carefully, weighing it in his palm. Then, with deliberate precision, he inserted it into the lock of the safe and turned. Gritty, a metallic click echoed through the room. The door swung open. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Holmes reached inside and withdrew a single item. A letter, yellowed with age, its seal broken. He turned it over, his sharp eyes scanning the faded ink. Then, ever so softly, he murmured, "Well, well." This just became rather more interesting. Chapter 6. The air in the study grew heavy as Holmes held the aged letter between his fingers. Turning it over with the same delicate care, he might afford an irreplaceable artifact. The brittle parchment crackled slightly in his grip, its wax seal broken long ago. Linwood swallowed hard. What does it say?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the desk, allowing the flickering gaslight to illuminate the faded ink. With an almost imperceptible nod, he unfolded the letter and began to read. I could see his sharp eyes scanning each line, his expression shifting ever so slightly. A twitch of the brow, a tightening at the corners of his mouth. Then, without a word, he handed it to me. I adjusted my spectacles and leaned in. The handwriting was elegant yet hurried, the ink smudged in places as though written in great distress. I read aloud, "To whom it may concern. If this letter finds the light of day, then the sins of the past have risen once more. The casket is a curse upon our family, and should it resurface, it will bring ruin. I implore whoever discovers this to let it remain lost. No man must seek what lies within. It is a key to the dead, and the dead. Do not forget, Lord Edwin Linwood 1854. I finished reading and let the letter fall from my hands. A chill ran through me, though the fire still burned bright in the hearth. A key to the dead, I murmured. What could he mean? Linwood paled. That was my grandfather's signature. But I don't understand. My father never spoke of this. Bainbridge frowned. Sounds like superstitious nonsense. A family curse, a dead man's warning. I've heard enough ghost stories in my time to know they seldom lead anywhere. Holmes, however, did not seem as quick to dismiss the note. He lifted the letter again, studying it with quiet intensity. And yet, he said softly, your missing casket has already cost 2 men their lives. His gaze flicked toward Linwood. Tell me, sir, was there ever any mention of what lay inside? Linwood hesitated. No, only that it was never to be opened. Holmes exhaled sharply. And that, Watson, is precisely why someone opened it. I blinked. But we don't know that they did. Holmes's smile was thin, his fingers once again brushing over the faint scratches on the desk. Oh, I think we do. Barlow stole the key, Whether for himself or another we cannot say. He fled, perhaps intending to barter it for something greater. But before he could, he was silenced. Bainbridge folded his arms. And the casket. Holmes turned the letter over once more, as though expecting it to reveal further secrets, still missing. But I dare say it has not gone far. Linwood's throat bobbed. You believe it is still in the house? Holmes's eyes gleamed. I believe, my dear sir, that someone went to great lengths to ensure its disappearance. But objects do not vanish of their own accord. It will be found. Bainbridge exhaled sharply. And when it is? Holmes gave him a look of quiet amusement. Then, Inspector, we shall see if Lord Edwin Linwood was right to fear what lay within. A silence settled over the room, thick with unspoken thoughts. The iron casket had resurfaced after 40 years, only to vanish again in the span of a night. 2 men were dead, and yet I could not shake the feeling that the mystery had only just begun. Holmes turned back toward the safe, running his fingers over the interior. Then, almost absently, he murmured, "Tell me, Mr. Linwood, who else lives in this house?" Linwood straightened. "Myself, the staff, and—" He hesitated. Holmes's sharp gaze flicked to him. "Yes?" Linwood exhaled. "My cousin, Miss Evelyn Linwood. She arrived a fortnight ago from Sussex." Holmes's smile was almost imperceptible. "Indeed? And tell me, sir, what does she know of the iron casket?" Chapter 7. Linwood hesitated, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk as though searching for an anchor in uncertain waters. "Evelyn," he echoed. I do not know what she could have to do with this." Holmes smiled faintly. "That was not my question, Mr. Linwood. I asked what she knows of the iron casket." Linwood exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Evelyn and I were never particularly close. My uncle, her father, was estranged from the family for many years. She came to stay here only recently, after his passing. I cannot imagine she would have heard of the casket before now." Holmes turned to Bainbridge. "Inspector, is Miss Linwood presently at home?" Bainbridge gave a curt nod. "I asked the butler on my way in. She's in her chambers upstairs." Holmes's expression darkened with thought. "Watson, would you do me the kindness of fetching her? I believe we ought to hear what she has to say." I nodded and left the study, making my way through the dimly lit corridors of Linwood House. The house felt different now, as though the very walls listened. The old portraits along the hallway seemed to watch me, their painted eyes gleaming under the soft flicker of gas lamps. Miss Evelyn Linwood's chambers were at the far end of the hall. I knocked firmly. A moment's pause, then the soft rustling of fabric before the door opened. The woman before me was young, perhaps 25, her dark auburn hair loosely pinned, as though she had not been expecting company. She was dressed in mourning black, her delicate features composed, though her sharp blue eyes held a quiet intensity. "Yes?" she asked, her voice measured. I inclined my head. "Dr. John Watson, at your service. Miss Linwood, my companion, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, wishes to speak with you. It concerns your cousin's passing." For the briefest of moments, I thought I saw her fingers tighten against the doorframe. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cool, unreadable expression. "Very well," she said simply, stepping past me. As I led her back down the hall, I could not help but study her more closely. There was something about her demeanor, calm yet controlled, that unsettled me. It was the same stillness I had seen in those who carried secrets they did not wish to share. When we entered the study, Holmes rose to his feet, offering a slight bow. "Miss Linwood, my condolences on your loss." Evelyn's lips pressed together. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes, but I suspect you have called me here for reasons other than condolences." Holmes's smile was thin. "Indeed, we are attempting to understand the events surrounding your cousin's passing. Tell me, Miss Linwood, did Ernest ever speak to you of a certain iron casket?" For the first time, her composure wavered. It was the briefest of hesitations. A slight intake of breath, a flicker in her gaze. But Holmes caught it at once. She began, then quickly shook her head. "No, I know nothing of any casket." Holmes's expression did not change, but I could tell he had noted her response. "And yet," he said smoothly, "you reacted as though the name was not unfamiliar." She swallowed. "I only hesitated because of the absurdity of the question." "Absurd?" Holmes mused. "A man is dead, Miss Linwood, and another followed him into the Thames not hours later. What is absurd is the notion that such deaths are mere coincidence." Evelyn's hands tightened in her lap. "You think I had something to do with this?" Holmes leaned forward slightly. "I think, Miss Linwood, that you know more than you admit." A silence filled the study, heavy with unspoken words. Then finally, Evelyn sighed. "Very well," she said quietly. "I will tell you what I know." Linwood turned to her in shock. "Evelyn," she held up a hand. "I had no wish to be involved in any of this. But now that it has come to murder, I have no choice." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Go on," she exhaled. "3 nights ago, I heard voices outside my chamber, low, urgent whispers. When I opened my door, I saw my cousin Ernest speaking in hushed tones with James Barlow." Linwood paled. "Ernest and Barlow? But why?" Evelyn hesitated. "I couldn't hear all of it." "But I did hear a name." Holmes's voice was quiet. "And whose name was that?" Evelyn turned her gaze upon him, and when she spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "Lord Edwin Linwood." A chill passed through the room. Holmes sat back, folding his fingers together. "The dead do not speak, Miss Linwood." Evelyn met his gaze evenly. "Then perhaps, Mr. Holmes, you should ask yourself why my cousin and his valet were speaking of a man who has been dead for 40 years. A silence followed. Then Holmes exhaled softly. "Watson," he murmured, "I believe this case has just taken a most fascinating turn." Chapter 8. A tense silence hung over the study, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Evelyn Linwood's words lingered in the air like the remnants of a ghostly whisper. Holmes remained motionless, his keen gaze fixed upon her as if dissecting her very soul. "Let us be precise, Miss Linwood," he said at last. "You are certain that you heard your cousin, Ernest Linwood, and his valet speaking of Lord Edwin Linwood, the very man who wrote the warning in that letter?" Evelyn nodded, her fingers laced together in her lap. "Yes, I am certain." Holmes exhaled softly. And you said they spoke in hushed tones, secrecy. That suggests urgency or perhaps fear. Linwood, who had remained silent until now, finally found his voice. "This is madness," he muttered. "My grandfather has been dead for 40 years. What possible relevance could he have to this tragedy?" Holmes turned to him. "A most pertinent question, Mr. Linwood. One I intend to answer." He stood abruptly and moved toward the bookshelf where the hidden safe had been discovered. His fingers trailed along the edges of the wood, his sharp gaze darting across the shelves, as if searching for something unseen. "Tell me, Miss Linwood," he continued, "did your cousin ever confide in you regarding his affairs? Any odd behavior in the days leading up to his death?" Evelyn hesitated. He was distant, more so than usual. There were nights I heard him pacing in his study, well past midnight. I once caught him staring out of the window, as if expecting someone. And then there was the locked drawer. Holmes's head snapped toward her. "A locked drawer?" She nodded. "In his desk. He was always protective of it, but in his final days he grew more paranoid. He kept the key on his person at all times." Holmes turned to Linwood. "Did you find this key after his passing?" Linwood frowned. "No. His pockets contained only his watch, some loose coins, and the safe key." His face darkened as realization dawned. "You think someone took it?" Holmes steepled his fingers. "I think it is highly probable." He turned to Bainbridge. "Inspector, I believe we must examine that desk at once." Bainbridge nodded and gestured for a constable to assist in forcing the drawer open. The desk was old but solid, and it took several moments before the lock gave way with a loud snap. The drawer slid open with an eerie creak. For a moment, none of us spoke. Inside, amidst stacks of old documents and ledgers, lay a single sheet of parchment. Holmes reached for it, his gloved fingers unfolding the yellowed page with the utmost care. His eyes scanned the text, and then, very slowly, a curious smile curved his lips. "What does it say?" I asked, leaning forward. Holmes read aloud. "I have found it. After all these years, it was never lost, only hidden. It is waiting, just as he said it would be. Barlow will help me retrieve it tonight. If I do not return, let it be known that Lord Edwin Linwood's secret did not die with him." A chill ran through me. "Holmes, what does this mean?" Holmes tapped the paper lightly. "It means, Watson, that our unfortunate Mr. Ernest Linwood was far closer to uncovering the truth than anyone realized." Evelyn swallowed hard. "You think he found the casket?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "I think he found something, and it frightened him." He turned abruptly to Bainbridge. "Inspector, the body of James Barlow. Did you examine it closely?" Bainbridge frowned. "What do you mean?" "Any marks, bruising, signs of struggle?" Bainbridge hesitated. "The coroner noted some strange bruises along his wrists, as though he had been restrained before he drowned." Holmes's fingers tightened on the parchment. "Then he did not simply fall into the Thames. He was placed there." A heavy silence fell over the room. Linwood's voice was barely above a whisper. "You mean he was murdered?" Holmes turned to him. "Murdered, Mr. Linwood. And whoever did it was desperate to keep him silent." I felt my breath catch. But what of Ernest? Was he murdered as well? Holmes's gaze darkened. "That, Watson, is the question. And I believe the answer lies with the iron casket. He turned to Evelyn, his voice softer now. Miss Linwood, you were the last person to see your cousin alive. Think carefully. Did he say anything that might reveal where he intended to go that night? Evelyn closed her eyes, as if searching her memory. Then, very softly, she whispered, "The cellar." Holmes straightened at once. "The cellar." She nodded. I heard him say it to Barlow. Something about the old cellar beneath the house. I assumed it was nonsense. But now, Holmes's smile was razor-sharp. "Miss Linwood, I believe you have just unlocked the final piece of this puzzle." He turned to Bainbridge. "Inspector, fetch your men. We are going below." As the study filled with hurried movement, I could not shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something far greater than a simple murder. And deep beneath Linwood House, hidden beneath decades of dust and shadow, something was waiting for us. Chapter 9. Holmes wasted no time. With Bainbridge leading the way, we moved swiftly through the grand corridors of Linwood House, the weight of the mystery pressing down upon us like the heavy London fog. Our footsteps echoed against the wooden floor as we descended a narrow staircase towards the lower levels of the house. The entrance to the cellar was concealed behind a heavy oak door at the far end of a dimly lit hallway. Linwood hesitated before producing a rusted iron key from a ring at his waist. "This door has remained locked for decades," he murmured. "Even I have never had cause to go down here." Holmes's expression was unreadable. "And yet your cousin Ernest did." Linwood swallowed hard and turned the key. The lock groaned in protest before giving way with a resounding click. He pushed the door open, revealing a darkened stairway leading underground. A damp, musty air rushed out to greet us, carrying with it the scent of time long forgotten. Inspector Bainbridge signalled to his constables, who lit their lanterns. The flickering glow cast eerie shadows against the damp stone walls as we began our descent. The cellar was vast, its ceilings arched, with old bricks blackened with age. Wooden support beams stood at intervals, their surfaces warped from years of neglect. Along the walls, rusted metal racks and empty wine casks sat in forgotten rows, their once grand contents long since turned to dust. Holmes's eyes swept the chamber with quiet intensity. "Something was hidden here," he murmured. "Something your cousin found." One of the constables moved forward, his lantern casting a glow over the floor. "Sir, look at this." We gathered around as he pointed to a trail of disturbed dust, leading toward a far corner of the room where a large wooden crate sat against the stone wall. Unlike the rest of the cellar, this area bore signs of recent activity. Holmes crouched down, running his fingers over the ground. "Footprints," he observed. "Two sets, one larger, one smaller. Ernest and Barlow." He glanced up at Bainbridge. "Inspector, I believe we have found their last destination." With a nod from "The man I called my friend, Reginald Fairfax, is dead by my own hand. I did not intend to kill him, but in my fury, I struck too hard. He fell, his skull cracking against the hearthstone. There was no witness, no soul to speak for him, only the silence that followed. I could not face the gallows, nor could I allow my family's name to be tarnished. And so, with shaking hands, I sealed his body within the iron casket and buried it where no one would ever find it. I pray no one ever does. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Linwood swayed slightly, gripping a nearby support beam. "Good God," he whispered. "My grandfather was a murderer?" Holmes closed the journal. "It would appear so." Bainbridge exhaled sharply. "And somehow, your cousin Ernest discovered the truth." Holmes nodded. He must have come across some reference to the casket, perhaps an entry in an old ledger, or a whisper of family legend. Whatever the source, he began searching. He enlisted Barlow's help, and together they uncovered the casket's location. I frowned. But if they found it, why didn't they open it? Holmes glanced down at the skull. Perhaps they did. His gaze flicked back to Linwood. "Your cousin's journal entry said, 'If I do not return, let it be known that Lord Edwin Linwood's secret did not die with him.' He must have realized what he had found." Bainbridge gritted his teeth. "And someone killed him for it." Holmes's expression was grave. "Yes, but not before he confided in Barlow." I shuddered, which means that whoever silenced Ernest knew they had to silence Barlow as well. Bainbridge folded his arms. "And that leaves us with one pressing question. Who?" Holmes turned his gaze to Evelyn Linwood. She stiffened. You can't possibly think I had anything to do with this." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Miss Linwood, you were the last to see your cousin alive. You knew he was searching for something, and when I asked you earlier about the iron casket, you hesitated, not because you didn't know about it, but because you knew exactly what it contained." Evelyn's lips parted slightly, her breath unsteady. I. Holmes stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "Tell me the truth, Miss Linwood. What did you know?" She swallowed hard, her fingers clenching at her skirts. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "I knew Ernest had found something dangerous. I tried to warn him to leave it alone, but he wouldn't listen." Her gaze flickered to Linwood. "He said it was our family's burden, that the truth had to come out." Linwood's voice was barely above a whisper. "And did you kill him for it?" Evelyn flinched, shaking her head violently. "No, I swear to you, I didn't." Holmes studied her carefully. Then, finally, he turned back to Bainbridge. "The true killer," he murmured, "is still among us." A hush fell over the chamber. Then Holmes knelt beside the iron casket, his fingers brushing against something inside the lid, something that had gone unnoticed until now. A set of initials. R.F. Holmes's eyes darkened. "Reginald Fairfax," he murmured. Linwood's brow furrowed. "But what does it mean?" Holmes straightened. "It means, Mr. Linwood, that this crime did not die with your grandfather. It means that someone has been watching, waiting, for 40 years. My breath caught. "You mean?" Holmes turned to Bainbridge. "Inspector," he said coolly, "we are dealing with a vengeance long overdue." Chapter 11. Heavy silence filled the underground chamber. The initials R.F., Reginald Fairfax, engraved inside the lid of the iron casket, sent a ripple of unease through all present. Holmes straightened, brushing the dust from his hands. "A name lost to time," he mused, "and yet someone remembered. Inspector, Bainbridge's face was grim. You believe someone sought revenge for Fairfax's murder after 40 years? Holmes exhaled sharply. Revenge has no expiration, Inspector. Some wounds fester in silence, waiting for the right moment to be torn open. I shuddered. But who? Who could have known? Holmes turned to Linwood. Tell me, Mr. Linwood, does the name Reginald Fairfax mean anything to you? Linwood hesitated, his brow furrowed in thought. Only that my grandfather once had a close friend by that name. My father never spoke of him. Holmes nodded. That is because your family buried more than just a body. They buried a history. And yet, someone uncovered it. His gaze flickered to Evelyn Linwood. She inhaled sharply. You still suspect me? Holmes's expression remained unreadable. Not of murder, Miss Linwood, but you know more than you admit. Evelyn's lips pressed together. For a long moment, she seemed to debate something within herself. Then, with a resigned breath, she spoke. When I was a child, she murmured, I overheard my father speaking of the Linwood name, and a terrible betrayal. He mentioned Reginald Fairfax, though I didn't understand the significance at the time. My father hated my grandfather, said he was a liar, a thief. I always assumed it was about money. Holmes nodded. It was about something far more valuable, a life. Bainbridge exhaled. So, your father knew. Evelyn hesitated. He suspected something, but he never spoke of it openly. And then he died, and the matter faded. She turned to Linwood. Ernest must have found the same hints my father did. Holmes clasped his hands behind his back, his mind already leagues ahead of us. And yet, it was not Ernest who paid the final price. It was Barlow. Bainbridge frowned. Why kill the valet? Holmes's gaze darkened, because he knew who was responsible for Ernest's death. A chill settled over the chamber. I cleared my throat. Then the real question is, who still has a stake in this after all these years? Holmes turned to Linwood. Who among your household has been with your family the longest? Linwood's brow furrowed. Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper. She has served here since I was a child. Bainbridge exchanged a look with Holmes. You think she... Holmes's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. Perhaps not the killer herself, but she may know more than she realizes. Without another word, Holmes strode past us, heading for the cellar steps. We followed quickly, lanterns in hand, our footsteps echoing in the damp passage. By the time we reached the upper floors, my nerves were raw. The walls of Linwood House seemed to press in around me, thick with the weight of decades-old secrets. Mrs. Harrow was waiting for us in the corridor, her hands folded neatly in front of her apron. She had the demeanor of someone expecting us. Is something the matter, sir? She asked Linwood, her voice level. Holmes stepped forward, studying her with his piercing gaze. Tell me, Mrs. Harrow, do you recall Reginald Fairfax? A flicker of something, shock or perhaps recognition, passed over her face before she masked it. That was before my time, sir. Holmes tilted his head. And yet you do recall the name. A brief hesitation, then only in passing. Holmes smiled thinly. Passing? And yet when your master, Ernest Linwood, began asking questions about the casket, he ended up dead. Her face paled. I don't know anything about that. Holmes exhaled softly. Mrs. Harrow, lying does not suit you. The truth, if you please. She swallowed hard, her fingers twitching at her apron. Then finally she whispered, "It was him. The old man. He never forgot." Linwood stiffened. "Who?" She exhaled shakily. "Reginald Fairfax's son." A stunned silence followed. Holmes's expression remained unreadable. "The son of the man your grandfather killed." Mrs. Harrow nodded. "He never knew his father, only that he had disappeared. His mother died in poverty. He swore to uncover what had happened." Bainbridge stepped forward. "Where is he now?" Her gaze flickered to the doorway. "Closer than you think." That precise moment, a shadow moved in the hall. Before we could react, a shot rang out. Holmes barely had time to move before the bullet whistled past his shoulder, embedding itself in the wooden doorframe. I turned sharply, my heart hammering. A man stood at the far end of the corridor, a smoking pistol in his hand. His face was racked with fury, his eyes wild. He was no longer young, yet his posture was rigid with anger. Holmes's voice was calm, almost amused. "Ah," he murmured. "Mr. Fairfax, I presume." The man's jaw clenched. "You have no idea." He spat, raising the pistol once more. Holmes did not flinch. "Oh, I do, my dear sir. I know that you have waited 40 years to avenge a crime buried in an iron casket." Fairfax's eyes burned with hatred. "And now I will finish it." Holmes's voice was quiet, certain. "I think not." Bainbridge lunged forward. As the gun fired again, the hallway exploded into chaos. Chapter 12. The gunshot rang through the corridor, a sharp crack that sent a shudder through the walls of Linwood House. Instinct took over. I threw myself to the side as Bainbridge surged forward. The bullet whizzed past, splintering the wood of a nearby cabinet. Holmes, ever composed in the face of danger, did not so much as flinch. Instead, he moved swiftly, a calculated step to the left, his eyes locked on the enraged figure of Henry Fairfax. The son of Reginald Fairfax de Bainbridge reached him first. With a powerful swing, he knocked the pistol from Fairfax's grip. The weapon clattered to the floor, skidding across the wooden planks. But Fairfax was not done. With a growl, he lunged forward, swinging wildly. Bainbridge caught his wrist, twisting it behind his back, but the older man struggled like a cornered animal, his strength fueled by decades of resentment. "Let me go," Fairfax snarled. "You don't understand. They buried my father like an animal. They let my mother die alone, never knowing what happened to him." Holmes stepped forward, his voice even, unshaken. "And so you took justice into your own hands." Fairfax twisted, his eyes flashing. "Justice?" I watched from the shadows as the Linwoods lived in luxury, while my family suffered in ruin. I swore I would find out the truth. His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving. For years I searched. I followed whispers, old letters, rumors of a casket lost to time. And then your cousin Ernest found it. Linwood, still pale, took a hesitant step forward. "You killed him," he whispered. Fairfax sneered. "I didn't have to. Fear did the work for me." A heavy silence followed. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Explain." Fairfax exhaled shakily. Ernest figured it out. He knew what was inside the casket, but the moment he saw it with his own eyes, the bones of a man he'd never met, yet whose blood was on his family's hands, he panicked. Fairfax's lips curled into a bitter smile. He locked himself in that study, drinking himself into a stupor. He was sick with guilt, and by morning he was dead. I frowned. Dead of what? Fairfax's eyes flickered with something unreadable. The weight of truth. Holmes exhaled softly. A man can die of many things, Watson. Guilt is among the heaviest. Bainbridge tightened his grip on Fairfax's arm. And Barlow? Fairfax's face darkened. Barlow was a fool. He wanted money. Thought he could sell what he knew. I couldn't allow that. Linwood's hands clenched into fists. You drowned him. Fairfax smirked. He wasn't the first man my family had to bury. A bitter silence followed. Then at last, Holmes sighed. And so the sins of the past claim yet another victim. Bainbridge pushed Fairfax forward, gesturing for his men to take him into custody. As they dragged him toward the door, he cast one final glance back at Linwood. This was always going to end this way, he said. Your family buried a crime, and I unearthed it. Then he was gone. I let out a slow breath. Good Lord, I muttered. What a waste of lives. Holmes turned back to the open iron casket, staring down at the remains within. His fingers traced the initials RF carved into the lid. There's no escaping the past, Watson, he murmured. It finds its way to the surface one way or another. Linwood, still shaken, stepped forward. What happens now? Bainbridge, dusting himself off, let out a sigh. Fairfax will stand trial. There's no avoiding that. Holmes nodded. As for your family's secret, Mr. Linwood, I suspect it will remain buried. The casket will be properly interred, and your grandfather's crime, while not forgotten, will no longer hold power over your family. Linwood's face was unreadable. And what of me? Holmes gave him a measured look. That, my dear sir, is up to you. A long silence followed. Then Linwood exhaled, his shoulders straightening. I will ensure my grandfather's wrongs are made right. My family must no longer live under the shadow of this crime. Holmes smiled faintly, a wise decision, as we left Linwood House that night, stepping out into the cool London air. I could not shake the lingering weight of the case. The sins of the past had clawed their way into the present, demanding payment in blood. But as Holmes lit his pipe, his keen eyes scanning the fog-shrouded streets, I knew one thing to be true. No secret remains buried forever, and justice, no matter how long delayed, always finds its mark.